Welcome, everybody, to another special edition of the Headless Giant podcast. Today, my guest is Jeff Up North. Jeff, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the people where they can find your channel.
Yeah, how's it going? My name is Jeff. You can find me on YouTube at Jeff Up North and on X at, I believe it was Jeff Up North, Jeff Up North underscore 57. I got it mixed up sometimes, but it should be easy to find me.
Right. And so, your specialization is in looking back at this part of American history that is very, very much clouded by not only the, waves and waves of the past, but also through academic deception. I think that's a pretty good description. They just sort
Oh, for
of
sure.
want to make this part really homogenous and go away. And so one of the videos I was watching that you did was talking about how they call these obvious dolmens glacial erratics. Could you go into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so there's one in Michigan, in the Huron Mountains near Marquette, and a few of them in Minnesota and Canada. And what they are is they're these large rocks, up to 900 plus pounds, and some of them are a lot bigger. And they're all specifically sitting on three smaller rocks. Now, to me, that looks like something that would be definitely man-made, because I don't think because most glacial erratics aren't going to all line up perfectly on top of three rocks in multiple different locations and have different examples of the same exact positioning of the rocks. So it definitely shows, in my opinion, that they're man-made, and there's no other places that I know of that the Native Americans in America doing it really. So the theory is that it would have been someone else that came through and used them as either like markers for shipping lanes or trading routes, stuff like that. But
Right. And so on some of them in particular, you shared in your video that they have these scratches on the back that looks like Ogham text, which is a an Ireland style text. Now, Ogham is, I've got an example here. Ogham can get mistaken for a lot of things because it's lines and dashes, and that's really kind of hard to differentiate unless you know what you're looking for. And the people who used Ogham knew how to use it. It's a tree language. So it says to me that these staves with little cross hatches on it were used on trees. And these were the ways that they would get messages to each other in maybe hostile areas where, you want these things to be mistaken for other things. Claw marks, scratches, whatever. But if you're trying to send a message to other Ogham readers, this would be a good way to kind of hide it a little bit. What do you think about that?
no, I completely agree with that. Especially if you don't, yeah, like you said, if you have no idea the differentiate between a couple scratches or the language itself, why wouldn't? I mean, absolutely.
And so, again, it's this three rock motif that I think really stands out the most. Not four, not five, not two. It's always three rocks, which says to me that there's a ritual significance there. So, three being the number of the first stable sort of geometry is what they're using instead of four, which kind of has this maybe triune nature of why they're building these dolmens, why they're taking these massive rocks, lifting them up, and then putting these other rocks underneath. Or there's various other techniques, right? I've seen
Mhm.
some people say that, well, they had these boxes filled with sand, and then they would put these, much larger rocks on top of them in the sand and then drain all the sand out. That way they're not lifting and moving and, sacrificing their fingers to it.
Hmm.
That's always a possibility. But there's lots of different techniques that can be used where you're doing this with a lot more precision than maybe it looks like. Because this looks really rough and it looks like whatever happened here must have been a miracle, which I think, it's understandable for geologists to say glacial erratics because there are some really unusual erratics, but nothing like this. This is way different.
Yeah, and all of them are all placed on top of big, larger slabs of stone, either on islands and lakes or in rivers, swamps, or overlooking a mountain, a cliffside. So,
Right. And
I
with the
mean,
way you see the distribution of glacial erratics, usually it's in the line with the glaciers. So you'll find not just one, but a whole string of them right along the outside of the glacier where the meltwater, receded during that part of the year. But that's not the case with these. So they got to come up with a better explanation because I don't think anybody's buying it anymore.
No, no, absolutely not. And a lot of them are found, like the one, the Sawbill dolmen. If you follow the river that it's on, it goes all the way down into a couple of smaller rivers and eventually makes its way into Lake Superior.
Right.
So, and that would have been the main hub for trading across with the mining, copper mining in the Great Lakes region, just Lake Superior, especially the Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula. So,
Now, do you think these rocks would be visible from the river so you know where you're going? This is like a perfect street sign.
yes, actually, the one I had mentioned, the Sawbill Dolmen, near Sawbill Landing in northern Minnesota, people take kayak trips up there, and specifically, that's one of the end destinations is to see it on the island when you're kayaking through.
Also on an island. Very
Hmm.
important because Lake Superior wasn't always a lake. It was a massive glacier. And so
Yep.
if this is right in the middle of that glacier, there's no way that that has anything to do with a rock up on top of the ice moving downward. That
Right.
doesn't make any sense at all. Like you would have to have much higher elevation in Canada right across the border coming down and somehow depositing it there. Otherwise, it just doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, and it would also be interesting to find out if the rock is, if it is a glacial erratic, you'd think it'd be a different type of rock or granite or basalt than the rocks it's on or nearby. Because if it's a glacially erratic, it was pushed down from much farther north. It wasn't picked up right on the spot and then dropped back down.
Right. And, often they're the result of erosion on much bigger, rocks, much bigger,
Hmm.
like a mountainside that's been, cleaved out by one of these glaciers as it moves down the side of the mountain. But there just doesn't seem to be any mountains or anything like that that would be able to deposit this thing perfectly on three stones in the middle of an island in the middle of Lake Superior.
The glacier just needed to know where to go, needed its own route planned out.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the inscription in Ogham. You got a book
Yeah.
with that in there?
Yeah. So the book, that's where I started referencing all these dolmens and stuff. I don't know if you can see that. Ancient Minds of the Kichigumi by Roger Jewell. And on the Sawbill dolmen, he mentioned that there were three distinct scratch marks. He said they were definitely human made, and they looked like Ogham symbols for the letters B and L, which, from what I'm aware of, is for Baal, and what he also took it away as. So, um, yeah. Sorry.
So let's get this straight.
Yeah.
So if it is B and L, Baal, and this is dedicated to Baal, it would match a lot of other stuff in Ireland because Ireland celebrates Beltane. They were celebrating Beltane way, way, way back. And Beltane is a spring festival where the Canaanites would sacrifice people. And the sacrifice of people was going on much later in time than the rest of the Mediterranean when it came to the Canaanite, Phoenician, Carthaginians, right? They were the ones that kept doing it. So if they had these Baal rocks, that would probably be a good site to look around for maybe some sacrifices because they were into that.
Oh
And
yeah, for sure.
what's really interesting is their use of mercenaries. So you could call Carthage one of the world's first melting pots because they didn't fight their own battles. They had mercenaries fight for them. And these mercenaries were, Celtic, they were Iberian, they were from all over the different parts of the world that these Canaanite, Phoenician, Carthaginians sailed to, make their trades because they were the ocean power of the Mediterranean. So During the Bronze Age, we know that the Phoenicians had tin mines in the British Isles. And it would not be too far of a stretch to say that they were getting mercenaries from Ireland. They were getting mercenaries from England. And if this Canaanite Phoenician god that spread all over the world because of their influence, that we still have the idea of Beltane or Baltane to this day, why wouldn't they be using these people in their operations in North America?
Oh, absolutely.
Just
And yeah, sorry.
in 2015, there was a attempt by these researchers to sail a trireme, one of these ancient boats that they used to use in the Mediterranean, across the Atlantic without resupply, without any help. And they did just fine. No problems. Took them about 2 weeks, 2 to 5 weeks. They had the supplies on the ship and they just did it. Now, again, they didn't have any navigational equipment or anything special. They just, use the Atlantic current that takes all that warm water up from around England across into the Caribbean area, and it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, the thing about triremes is that everybody focuses on the rowers because the rowers are really doing the difficult stuff while they're in places like the Mediterranean region where they're going to battle on these boats. So they need a lot more effort. But if they're just sailing across the water, why can't they just sail across the water? They've got the wind at their backs. They're going in that direction. That's the way that the Atlantic tides go. So it doesn't seem to me that they would need a whole lot of rowers. All they just need to do is put up their sails and then go. But the idea is, well, maybe they didn't, have the right type of ships or whatever. That doesn't hold a lot of water. If they've done it before, and these were the world's preeminent sailors, just anywhere. They were the first ones to sail around the Horn of Africa into India. That was in the later part of Carthage. So it's seems rational to me that they might have had this contact over with North America. And the fact that it is in Ogham, I think actually helps the Canaanite Phoenician hypothesis because that was one of their main uh, mining hubs is there in England and in Ireland. So just hire them. It doesn't make
Right.
it.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the mounds? Because I know there's been a ton of talk about these cross-cultural influences in the mound cultures from Europe to North America.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and there's so many mounds. Well, there used to be at least. It's sad that most of them have been plowed over or dug through. And one could even use the argument that mounds were like the first type of building structure before they started building pyramids. And if that's the case, well, they must be older than that. If they're saying like around 1000 AD, or because I don't think they put any of the mounds in America before 500 AD, maybe a few, but and just the amount of stuff they find in them. I know I was reading some of the artwork they found, and a lot of it's made on copper, like copper plates and stuff that was mined up in the UP of Michigan. And I was reading an article about how it was somewhere in the South Pacific. They said there was the same type of artwork in the South Pacific as they were finding in some of these mountains in America. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find a hole to fall down on that one. But if I could ever find it, it'd be interesting. But I did like look at some of the pictures of any ancient like Indonesian type art and compared it to some of the stuff found in America, and there is a lot of similarities in some spots. So
Right. Dr. Gregory Little on X is a great follow for that stuff. He's always talking about these copper plates and the art motifs in them and this eye that is constant. Across all these different cultures, this eye plays out well. There you go. You got
right
Gregory's
here.
book?
Yep.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a very expensive book now on Amazon.
I believe it. I'm glad I got it when it wasn't too expensive then.
Right.
No, I love that book. It's awesome. But yeah, like the symbol like you were talking about with the Hamsa eye. They find them in all sorts of places around here, and that goes back to, was it the is it Canaanite or Sumerian?
Man, the thing about the Canaanites and Sumerians too, I found that the same eye styles in both forms of artwork are very, very similar. So you've got this kind of oval almond shaped eye in both situations, and they both had these really particular um, irises that were all blue, right? In both Sumerian and in Phoenician artwork. So they're sending a signal. You know, people choose these art styles deliberately, and what they wanted to show is that they were related to these people that everybody kind of maybe a little bit knew were responsible for the gods and all the rest of the stuff coming through into the rest of the Mediterranean. So you find a lot of crossovers in the theology of the Sumerian gods and the Greek gods. So there was a through line there, probably coming through the Phoenicians again. So they had these three main towns in on the eastern side of the Mediterranean: Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. And those three towns there, they were like the purple trading capital of all the Mediterranean. So you had these strange carnivorous snails that they would use to make this green stuff. And they had this very particular way to change that green stuff into purple stuff. And that purple dye was their main export to all of the kings all over the Mediterranean. So they had a lot of money. They were the only ones to produce this stuff, and to think that they didn't think of themselves as having a very distinctive identity that went all the way back to the founding of the alphabet, you know, because the first alphabets were Canaanite Phoenician, and they knew that, and everybody else knew that. So the Greeks were working off of a bastardized form of Canaanite Phoenicians. The Hebrews had Canaanite Phoenician alphabet, which they just reversed and had it backwards, which is interesting. And you know, Romans, the Roman lettering that came from Canaanite Phoenician. So all of our forms of Western alphabets come through this Canaanite Phoenician influence. And it makes a lot of sense if they're the ones who are not only possessing all of the world's trading infrastructure, but also all of the world's communication knowledge, because you needed that communication to really have this international shipping network.
Oh, for sure.
Because obviously you got to know what's on your ship. You got to get investors and all the rest of the stuff that we think is so modern. It goes way, way back. You know, they had profitable company-sized ventures, corporatism ventures, way, 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 way back. And what's interesting too is the Carthaginian government. Tell me if this sounds familiar. They had a form of government they call today Republican oligarchy. So they would have these ruling families that basically owned all the shipping interests that came together as the Senate. But above those people, they had these judges. And the judges were above all the rest of them. The judges had to be these bloodline people. And right below the bloodline people were the shippers, which were related to the bloodline people. And at the very bottom, after these guys couldn't figure it out or get it together, if they disagreed, it was kind of a check and balance. Then it would go to the popularly elected House of Representatives. So if this bloodline family disagreed on what they should do, then they finally threw it over to the population. And that sounds a lot like our form of government today.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'd say so.
At least the plebs back then got the tiebreaker. I don't think we get the tiebreaker. I think they
No.
got rid of that.
A lot of times we can vote what we want and they'll still do something else.
Right. And you know, one of the big symbols for them was the phoenix. You've got the Phoenician phoenix, right? And if you look at the American eagle, you'll notice it's got this little fringe on the back of its head. And artistically, the bald eagle does not have that. That's actually a character trait that goes to the phoenix. So everybody thinks the bald eagle is our, you know, national seal. But if you look at the feathers on the back of its head that are sticking up, that's not a cowlick. They're indicating it's Phoenician.
Huh, I never even thought about that. I'll have to
Yeah.
look into that for sure after this.
That's in the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, 33rd degree Freemason.
Okay.
And what's interesting too, the if we track the Phoenician influence, it was most prominent in the mystery schools. And the mystery schools before Christianity and before, the shift over to this other form, these were the centers where you learned about the afterlife. They would throw you in a dark cave for 3 days to trip your balls off on Kaikion as you're surrounded by all these dead bodies of the other people who didn't make it. They didn't clean out their caves very often. And you had to figure out what it was to not only wake up in the underworld, but you had to find your way out. And there were rituals and all sorts of things that you had to go through to get out there. And it sounds a whole hell of a lot like the cycles of Inanna coming from Sumerian. So she had to go through the underworld, come back up into the light, and that represented sort of like the wintering cycle into the spring-summer cycle, which sounds a whole lot like the Hades Persephone myth going on in Greece, because it was directly influenced by that Sumerian Akkadian influence. So I think between all these things, you got to kind of ask yourself, who is the one spreading this stuff? And if you find the one spreading it, you'll find also the founders of it, because I think they founded a lot of this stuff and kept it in the family, like they tried to do with a lot of things. So, the ruling family idea really took a different shape after the Punic Wars, because I think they realized if you can control the secret societies within a given society, you can control that society. So what's the point in being an overt empire when you can actually have a lot more influence as a covert empire? Stick to the mystery schools, stick to all these secret knowledge institutions that didn't go away with Christianity. They kept popping up. You've got the Knights Templar, obviously. You've got the Freemasons. You've got all these other mystery schools that branch out of this original Eleusinian / Canaanite Phoenician route going all the way back to Samaria, and you see the same themes playing out again and again in all of their mystery school practices. I think it would be, the obvious choice, if you didn't want to have to fight another empire like Rome, to just take it over from within.
The old Trojan horse.
Exactly. And who was in charge of giving the Mycenaean Greeks all of that bronze, all of that copper and tin that they got from all these other places? It was the Minoans, who then became Canaanite Phoenicians. So they were the arms dealers of the ancient world. So as they're going to fight, they get this wrong in all of the movies about Troy, is they didn't actually look like these, svelte, Brad Pitt looking guys. They were wearing garbage cans made out of bronze that they would slam into each other again and again and again until somebody died. So they had suits of armor back then, and they looked ridiculous. If you look up Mycenaean armor, they look like absolute, pieces of garbage can, just slamming up against each other, which I think is hilarious. But, other people are like, my kin, At the same time, it's the Minoans selling them all of these weapons, all of these arms came through that Minoan and then later Canaanite Phoenician influence. And back then, in the Trojan War, they were using the alphabet called Linear A and Linear B from a time period that the Minoans gave it to them. So the Minoans not only invented the alphabet we know of today, but the alphabet that existed pre-Bronze Age collapse that was lost. I think we still aren't able to translate Linear A or Linear B.
Mm-hmm.
They might have made progress in the last couple of years. I haven't checked in a while, but they lost it all. They became illiterate. The Bronze Age collapse was so dramatic that they became illiterate all over the Mediterranean. That's something, That's a significant reset of human knowledge. But within that reset is the seeds of a whole lot of other stuff, because one of the reasons why the Bible was so interesting to the ancient people was because it told stories about pre-Bronze Age collapse civilization. And they wanted to know about that stuff. They wanted to know where they came from. And this book they called the Bible, or the Septuagint by the Romans, supposedly had all the answers for them, because they wanted to find out what happened before this Bronze Age collapse, what happened before the flood, because they all had flood myths too. In
Mm-hmm.
Greece, it was Deucalion and Pyrrha. And so you've got all of this stuff about the flood, and turns out all of the Hebrews are related directly. They're cousins with these Canaanite Phoenicians. And where you can draw the line between Canaanite and Hebrew is not as easy as it makes it sound in the Bible, because they have the same DNA. It's the same group of people. So all these cousin groups just decided, hey, we're getting a lot of heat on this whole being Canaanite Phoenician. What if we just say that we're a different group? Let's say we're Hebrews. Who's gonna disagree? And
Right.
so the whole idea there was, we have to trim back our numbers, not be so obvious about it, and we can maintain our wealth through secrecy. And the Carthaginians were all about secrecy. They had this one harbor that they built walls around, and they had this sort of rotating uh, uh, kind of a shield for this harbor inside of Carthage, so that nobody from the outside could see how many ships are inside. They were very, very skilled in keeping secrets. They didn't want anybody to know what was being loaded up, what was being shipped, and spies were very capable of doing that on all these other places, but not in Carthage. They kept their secrets.
Wow. I had no idea on that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. And if you look into the Baal worship, they called it Baal Hamon in Carthage. Again, what the Bible says about the Canaanite Phoenicians worshiping Baal is very accurate to the anthropological time period that they were writing it, because Baal Hamon and Tanit were the god and goddess of Carthage. And the Tanit worship, you can actually see it going on to this very day. You find Anderson Cooper's mother has a picture from 1978 where she's sitting on the bed with her two kids. I've got it in my list. I could show it to you. But she's got this great image of Tanit over top of a Tophet. And let me see. So a Tophet is where they would burn these children and put their bodies in these urns and bury the urns at these special places that were dedicated to Tanit. And let me see here. Well, here's one of them. So this is the sign of Tanit. Have you ever
Okay.
seen that before?
I know I have. I just can't think of where.
See, it looks like an upside down, well, no, a right side up Ankh, but the bottom part
Yep.
is more layered than the rest of the Ankh, which, they could be trying to revive the Ankh through their Tanit worship. But that basic symbol right there with the Eye of Providence, which was a combination of the moon and the sun sitting on top of it, Eye of Providence, again, is a common motif. But let's see here.
Hmm.
That's one of the markers of the Tophets. They had lots of other markers that are more complicated. Basically, what they're doing here. Oh, here's now. Let me get another marker here. Let me see. Another marker. I'm not gonna find it, but here's.
That happens, eh?
Yeah, the problem is it always tries to save these images as other things. This is the picture of Anderson Cooper, his brother, who was sacrificed at 15, and
Oh
the
boy.
seal of Tanit in the background. Again, you got the circle with the triangle right here, the two arms at the side sort of lifted up, and then the Eye of Providence right up here on top. Sun and moon combination. And if you're looking real close, you can see these two angels on the sides of this burning sacrifice. And there's a man inside of that little chamber in there that has all these little flames around him. Can you see that? So
Yeah.
Anderson Cooper's right here. And, no, that's his brother. That's Anderson right there. That's Gloria. That's his mother. And she's reading to the boys under this horrific human sacrifice going on behind her.
Jeez.
Yeah. So tenet worship was at least going into the 1970s. Now, again, 3000 BC to the 1970s. Well, actually, 800 BC, because that's when Carthage was founded, and Tanit was a Carthaginian goddess. So that's still a hell of a long time to be doing these human sacrifices. And I think this is kind of an indicator that we do have kind of an invisible empire going on just from a few of these images that we still find today. Let me see. Is there another? Here's another good one. So another good, there's the triangle goddess again, same motif, same moon is down here, more of a sun in the background here. And again, we see Zelensky and the Pope. Perfectly happy to be in front of this. What is this goddess over here? I guess we'll never know. But is that supposed to be Mary and this one's supposed to be something different? I'm sure if we'd ask, they'd give us something. But
Oh, of course. They're very, very, very open about everything that they know or control.
So yeah, I think it makes sense when you think about the Knights Templar. We find all these Knights Templar artifacts all over the United States, up in Canada as well. You've got the Money Pit, where they found these coins from the Knights Templar. On Christopher Columbus's ships, we see on each one of their sails, they have this big red cross of the Knights Templar. We know that Portugal was founded by the Knights Templar. Portugal. They were talking about for you Grail when they founded, and it's really interesting. The first king of Portugal was a really sickly boy. When this monk came, Cistercian monk came and said, "Queen, we'll take your child from you to get him better, and you just have to give us this small portion of land over on the east or the west side of the Iberian Peninsula, and we'll stay out of your hair." Again, the Iberian Peninsula that was occupied by Carthage. Like Carthage owned most of the Iberian Peninsula during the Punic Wars. So they were very interested in this stuff. And so this sickly kid that was the son of the queen and the king supposedly got better. And not only did he get better, he got almost superhuman powers. He had this massive sword that people could still not wield today with a full suit of armor on, like 80 pounds of armor, 70 pounds of sword. This guy was a beast. Again, like you've got this transformation from sickly child into this almost superpowered adult, and they just swept all of the Iberian Peninsula of the Moors later on, right? Now, Moorish rule over Spain wasn't very particularly rough for the Spanish people that still lived there, but it did get a lot rougher after they kicked all the Moors out and then started collecting the same kind of absorbent, Western taxation that we sort of experience today. But before that, it was far more equitable. They had, certain laws that they would follow. But, throughout all of history, we're told that the Moorish invaders of Spain was an affront. I think we're not getting the full story, because it's not only the Canaanite Phoenicians that let the Moors in, it's the Canaanite Phoenicians that then drove them back out. These are for purposes that we don't necessarily 100% know why they would do this sort of thing, but we do see their fingerprints all over it. And, Portugal is the one that financed Christopher Columbus to come to America. So it's almost a direct, basically Portugal was it is to this day a stronghold for the Rosicrucians. They've got the Rosicrucian temple there. They were driven out of every European country except for Portugal. So when you think Portugal, think Knights Templar because they had the maps. They understood it was possible and they made the journey across there. And that's why we think of Christopher Columbus as the one who discovered the New World, even though we know that the Vikings also
Hmm.
discovered the New World and the Chinese probably also discovered the New World and all these other groups. But we have to know that this Christopher Columbus guy, whose dubious history, anybody who looks into the background of Christopher Columbus and sees his family, it's like, this doesn't make any sense. What is this guy? Is he a fabric maker or what? But apparently he's the guy. And so they chose him because I guess he was related to the ruling families. And in the United States, we have what's called the Society of the Cincinnati, which started in 1783, that every president has been inducted into forcefully, and nobody knows about it. But these are the ruling families of America. You can see their influences all over the corporate schema. And the idea was that this Society of the Cincinnati was going to be a ancestral military junta. So only the sons of the Revolutionary War officers could be inducted into it, and it was passed down through the family lines. And they still have the building in DC. You can go to it right now and take a tour. It's called the Society of the Cincinnati. And they'll tell you, yeah, we're kind of an ancestral military junta, and all these Revolutionary War officers gave birth to all of these, heads of industry and governors and all these other positions today that all these society members are a part of. And it's almost not even known about at all. And so this is your oligarchic republic. You've got the ruling families, and then those ruling families come to you with the decision after it's all done. Oh, and get this, Carthage had so many mercenaries because, they didn't want to get their own hands dirty. And what do you see America doing all the time? It's proxy wars.
Hmm.
I don't think proxy wars is a new thing. I think this has been going on since the dawn of civilization. If you can get somebody else to fight your enemy for you, you're golden. And it's even better if you don't like those other people either, because then they can kill each other off. What's going on in Ukraine right now?
Exactly that.
So this Canaanite Phoenician influence, I think if you track it in America, you'll find why all of these academics don't want to talk about it, because they get their funding from Society of the Cincinnati members who are, Cincinnatus was this Roman general, right? And what he did was he became emperor twice, right?
Okay.
He went back and tended his fields after he had won again. I think it was against Carthage. And then when they were invaded, he went back to becoming emperor again. So he was the farmer, made emperor, made farmer again, made emperor again. And this was who the society members, the Rosicrucians, the Knights Templar, the Masons, they all referred to George Washington as the reincarnation of Cincinnatus, because he was president. He went back to farming his fields, just like Cincinnatus did. So what are these, Christians or at least deists doing talking about reincarnation of Cincinnatus? And why is this Society of the Cincinnati, again, based around the mounds? Because, Cincinnati, as we know, is a city built around the mounds. As most
Mhm.
cities are in the Midwest, they're built around the mounds. And the very first thing that these Society of the Cincinnati members did is go around and document the mounds. Either they knew that these things were connected to their ancient past and they were trying to figure out the routes that they needed to take to rebuild this country that they had lost or rediscovered or whatever, or they were just obsessed with big old piles of dirt.
Yeah,
To
like
me, it seems
I think.
obvious.
Oh yeah, I think it was it. I believe it was Thomas Jefferson that did a lot of the excavating of all the mounds.
Yes, he
They
did.
did a ton, and they did most of the documenting of where they were.
George
So
Washington, too. He was obsessed with the mounds. Pretty
yeah.
much every founding father that was a member of the Society of the Cincinnati were interested in surveying the mounds and finding out where they were because they knew that they were signposts and they could find their ancient ancestors' treasure around those signposts. Again, all of these mounds are in the bends of rivers. You know, usually after the bend in a river, you find that the river splits. That's just the general idea. So if you've got these mound highways going up and down these rivers, you better know what they are.
Oh yeah.
So I think, we don't think in terms of waterway travel anymore, but during early America, you had to have the shipping lanes of these, barges going up and down these rivers all day long, taking stuff from different places, working functionally. And part of that was knowing the bounds and knowing how to get around in this whole system.
Oh yeah, and that's yeah, like you said, it needs to be on the river. That's why the biggest cities in America are on major waterways. Chicago is on Lake Michigan. New York's up in the it's pretty much the ocean, but
Right. What was there before Chicago?
exactly, probably a bunch of mounds.
Mississippians. They had bigger pyramids than Egypt, you know?
Oh yeah.
To me, the Canaanite Phoenician hypothesis makes sense. I haven't fully fleshed it out and given everybody a massive timeline yet, but I think these dolmens all over the region are indicators of where to go and what to do and who is doing it as well.
Mhm.
So, what are some other dolmens that you have found other than this
Sawbill Landing.
Sawbill Landing?
Yeah, it's got a few different names people go by. I think they use the Boundary Waters. Then they use Lucinda Lake. It's just a bunch of different names from different people who use it. There's another one. Shoot. Can't find my notes. I had them here. But I know the Huron Mountain in Michigan. Huron Mountain Dolman. That's in I think it's just northwest of Marquette, Michigan. And this one's actually up on a cliff overlooking the valley out. And I think that's the one. I think they figured it was 900 pounds. And you can find some pictures of it. You can just type in Huron Mountain Dolman if you want to pull that up. And what I see a lot of people do is they use their hat as a size comparison. They just throw their hat on top of it. And no one knows. So it's no one in modern history that did it. Otherwise, someone will probably know or tell a story. And I don't think anyone did it for fun because 900 pounds is a big freaking rock to set on top of the three stones, just like the ones found on the rivers and waterways. 3 stones. And they still say it's a glacial erratic, same the geologists that have seen it, or the archaeologists, and they say there's no archaeological reason to do anything to it because it's just a glacial erratic. So
Go. Here's is that the one? Nope.
No, that's the Sawbill.
That's the Sawbill. Remove that and throw another one up here. Mountain Dolman. Oh, perfect.
There it is.
Yeah, so this is overlooking a valley. This is like an ancient billboard. Look at that. It's the same shape as my hat. I know how far away I am. And, if you're tracking, if you're surveying, there's all sorts of these different tricks you can find that you can use to figure out distances, that can figure out all sorts of stuff. So you can pace out a tree, you can find out how tall it is, and all the rest of this stuff just by using little tricks. And I think having these dolmens were the ancient form of billboards, this way to, eat at Joe's.
Let's see what I had. And yeah, I guess about 100 or so feet away from this is another, they figured it's a standing stone. And I believe they said it lines up with the sunset with a distant peak on the solstice.
Right.
So, and actually, I forgot to mention earlier with the Sawbill Landing one, there is on the island is a rock to the north and to the south of it, and it is this perfect. They make a straight, perfect north-south line if you line them up. So,
Perfect. So the idea that they were used in ritual probably makes sense too, especially if you take the ancient form of religion, which was constantly about sacrifice, not just human sacrifice, also animal sacrifices and whatnot, to say thank you to the gods and to make sure that you're on their good side so that you can make journeys and not be harmed. So having this idea of this talismanic effect of these different uh, ley line slash quarter parts of the year type dolmens would give you the perfect way to set up those sacrifices for these different parts of the year. So they could serve multiple functions, but you have to know that those three rocks right there aren't natural. Somebody put that together. That is not another glacial erratic in the
Yeah.
exact same formation with the stones on the furthest outside points to hold this other one on top of it. That's just, and it, from this angle, I mean, I could be wrong, but it looks like it's similar stone to the stone that's under it. It doesn't
Yeah.
look like it's been deposited from miles and miles away. It's the same color, and you've got the same kind of cleavage going down there.
Mm-hmm. The same type of volcanic basalt that's found in the region.
Right. And if this was a flat rock to begin with, what are the odds that these three other rocks are just going to pop up there too? It's just, it beggars the imagination that they would say that this is natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing natural about that. Because in all these places, there'd be tons of other smaller rocks all over the place.
Right.
And it probably would have fallen on maybe 4 or 5 rocks, not 3.
And so anybody telling you that we're done with archaeology and we know everything about this place is just lying.
We don't know anything.
And just a cursory glance at what the Canaanite Phoenicians were doing and where all the bronze from the Bronze Age came from shows you that these guys were much better hooked up than we even realize today. And probably they meant it that way because they were very good at keeping secrets. The very first intelligence agency in the United States. Do you know what that was?
That was the shoot. Go ahead.
Office of Naval Intelligence.
Okay. I suppose I didn't know it. I was going to say something else.
Those are the original, because again, Navy is all about the intelligence because you have to spot these other ships, you have to identify them, you have to have human intelligence, you have to have all of this other stuff before you get into port to protect shipping lanes and everything else. It's all skullduggery. It all involves spies. It involves all of this stuff. This entire expansive network has to be an intelligence and counterintelligence network so that your enemies don't get all of the information they need to strike you where it hurts the hardest on the open ocean. So yeah, there is intelligence gathering that goes into ground forces, but not nearly as much without as much coordination as you need for ocean travel. And if you're going to be an empire, you need to have that intelligence network because you're going to be chewed to pieces real quick from all your competitors if you don't. So the idea that they would be the very first intelligence network using mystery schools and all the rest of that doesn't seem too far out of the equation either because these are mystery schools. You have to know these people are keeping secrets. To this day, we don't fully know what went on inside of the Eleusinian mystery schools. We have the archaeology, but we don't exactly know what the ritual processes were. And that's pretty impressive if you think about it. All of these people that came into and went out of the Eleusinian mystery schools were able to keep it a secret. That's not very common.
No. Yeah, they didn't have to worry about the internet, so it was a little easier.
Well, not the ancient world. Apparently, things were getting out like crazy. I mean, you find the same kind of mythology spreading all
That's
over.
true.
You know?
Yeah, with the flood myths, I mean, Epic of Gilgamesh could be tied in with anything with the Noah's Ark and all that.
Right. All these different gods in cultures that seemingly had nothing in common, and yet there they are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and we've got all these Proto-Indo-European words that got translated into Chinese. So somebody was making contact back then. It couldn't have been just a static world if we've got this spread of culture from Ukraine, starting in Ukraine and going all the way over to China. That's pretty impressive. And you've got the Mongols today that have a ton of Proto-Indo-European words. Even some Proto-Indo-European words made it over to Japan. The British word soap had made it to Australia before any contact with the British. So this new thing they called soap had made it all the way down into Australia, that they were trading with these other New Guinea tribes before any British sailors ever even showed up.
Oh wow.
Right. There's a massive network of trading going on all around us, whether
Hmm.
we know it or not, because what happens to the goods after you sell them? Do you know? How much
Nope.
more how much more so would that be in the ancient world where
Yeah. Wow.
sorry, they love their
Yeah. Nope.
motorcycles here.
Yeah, it's sun's out, so may as well take advantage of it.
Hell yeah. But yeah, I think this is a pretty good introduction. I'd love to have you back on anytime the subject of dolmens and mounds and stuff comes up. You're up
Yeah.
in the Upper Peninsula, and you've got a ton of content on your channel. So if you could tell people where to find you and what to look for, things you're proud of.
Yeah. So my channel, Jeff Up North, and basically I'm trying to do weekly videos focusing on the ancient copper mining, the Upper Peninsula, where did the copper go, who mined it, and a bunch any connections with pre-Columbian sea trade. Obviously, many believe said the copper fueled the Bronze Age because it's raw copper in the Upper Peninsula is 99.9% pure, and it's one of the only places on Earth that you can find copper of that purity. And I believe they have found some in bronze artifacts that were found in England. That was a few months ago. They were doing the testing on that. And I know Ricardo was doing a lot of that, and Rick Osmond were heading the research on that. So hoping to get something coming out of that soon. But and on the subject of mountains, I believe my video that I'm making, probably once we're done here, I'm gonna start making it, will be on the mountains in the Upper Peninsula, because they claim there's none. Well, I know of one about a half hour away. It's not documented. It's not anything, but you even look at the LiDAR pictures. It's perfect dome, perfect dome mound.
And Michigan has a horrible track record with
Hmm.
track of their mounds. They've excavated over 10,000 of them in Michigan and the Upper Peninsula, and they took all the artifacts and they shoved them into the university basement, and they haven't done anything with them since.
Yep. And
So
actually, even in Gregory Little's book, I think there's 1 or 2 pages for Michigan. And then you have Wisconsin or Ohio, and there's like 100 and some pages. But Michigan has nothing because they didn't do anything about it. And with all the logging and the mining industries up here, before anyone even gave a damn about it, they just bulldoze it out of the way or mined it.
farming, especially.
Farming, yep. Especially down the lower peninsula, yeah.
And the funny part is we've seen how these dolmens and these megalithic structures have been placed at significant points in the ley line matrix, and they've shown scientific studies showing that seeds exposed to these areas next to these megaliths will sprout and stay alive longer than seeds that have not been exposed to this stuff. They don't know why, but this ancient form of farming in America was very different from what we know of as farming today. But there was farming going on. They weren't fencing everything in. They weren't, utilizing the ideas of scarcity and all the rest of this stuff. They would plant stuff so that it would grow wild and be better and hardier and more accustomed to those conditions, and also harvested by humans in such a way that it would keep coming back. So the Native Americans had these routes that they would follow, that they would plant on, that would keep these same edible crops in season as they would travel around the country. And it was a different form of agriculture, but I don't think there's really any way you could say that that's not agricultural.
No, absolutely.
but I think it's just this different mindset of how they, distributed the land and how they, you know, carried out the functions of a sort of a wild, cultivated area that doesn't make a lot of sense to us because we think everything has to be put into these, very blocky kinds of setups where
Mhm.
everybody has a 4x4 plot of land and that's what you're allowed to plow. Honestly, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That doesn't seem very efficient and is not utilizing any of the natural properties that these, plants and animals would carry over to one another.
Yeah, and then I'm a topic of farming, ancient farming, and I think it's Menominee, Michigan. They had just read an article yesterday. They just found ancient farm beds, raised planting beds. And I
Right?
think they pushed back their timeline of what the farming in the UP was by a drastic amount. They found they grew a lot of corn and rice and stuff like that. So I
Which
think
came out of Mexico. They had trading networks going into Mexico.
oh yeah, and I think they've actually even found Michigan copper and stuff in Mexico, possibly down even south towards Brazil or Peru. But and it's tough if you can't get your hands on a book to read about this stuff or study it all. You can't find anything on the internet.
Right?
It only curates certain things you want to see. So it's actually gotten really hard for me to do a lot of research, other
The
than just buying the books that I can find.
the dead internet is really taking over. So
Hmm.
it's very important that people follow people like you who have started the process of collecting these books of the ancient world because we're not going to have any of that stuff. Very.
Nope.
And as things get worse in terms of this oligarchic republic that we're going into, the internet is going to be target number one. So if you can't find the books, you got to have, content producers like yourself letting people know, hey, it's not what they're telling you. This is something different. These academics are lying. Michigan has thousands and thousands of mounds. It doesn't have zero. We have to know this stuff because
Hmm.
this is where we're living. I mean, we're
Yeah.
interacting with these energies too. It wasn't just ancient people. And if we don't understand how they saw the world, maybe there are things about our environment that are changing us that we don't necessarily realize. Maybe slowly over time, but I had a friend of mine leave the North American continent back over for Europe, where she originally came from, and she's like, I feel like North America is cursed, going all the way back to the time when we were hit by the younger Dryas.
Hmm.
But there might be something to it. I mean, we think about the resets happening in Europe, every few thousand years. What about in North America? The resets are just fast and nonstop. What a lot of people don't realize is that before Columbus ever set foot in the Caribbean, they had the Black Plague going on in North America. And hundreds of thousands of people were wiped out by the Black Plague. Now, how did they get it? I thought that
Right.
was only a Europe and Asia thing. Well,
Hmm.
no, apparently somehow it got over here and it wiped out a bunch of Native American tribes that, maybe included the Mississippians, maybe included a lot of these people that they don't even accept, even had these fantastic structures. But I mean, just reading through Gregory Littrell's work, you find that no, they were not what, the old anthropologists would call primitives. They were
Hmm.
very advanced,
Yeah. I
right?
mean, just
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, just even a lot of their artwork and stuff. Just the fact that they were, if it was whoever was here at the time, the natives at the time that mined the copper, how do you figure out how to extract it from the ground in the first place? You learned it from somewhere. Or it could have been the chance that you had a fire going and you threw water and it hit the rocks next to it and exploded and fell off a cliff's face. I mean, it could be the chance of that, but they use the same type of mining in Europe at around the exact same time.
Right.
So that's another crossover right there you could use for the argument.
It's not like copper just falls out of the ground.
Well, it did at first with all the float copper you could find after the glaciers receded, but eventually you're going to pick up all the stuff that you can find on the ground. You have to go into the rock.
Right.
So,
Well, I know when it comes to mining, you have layers on top of the ore. And this is where they would get a lot of the what do you call it? The ochre right? So
Yep.
ochre comes from this sort of quicksilver type material on the outside of ore. And so, the way that they discovered quicksilver was kind of like what was left over after they went after the copper. And then they find that, this can make amalgams of just about any other metal. And so then they start refining you know, the quicksilver. And I know they still use this technique a lot in the Amazon. It's horrible for the environment, but they take a bunch of quicksilver and they dump it into the rivers. It makes amalgam out of the metals that's sitting on the bottom of the river, and then they dredge it. You know, they also kill everything in the process, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that they were using that kind of technique because you get a lot of this leftover quicksilver as you're refining and creating this copper.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe looking for that. Because again, I think the ore in America was so highly valued. If you look at the coal in Pennsylvania, it's the purest coal in the world, the most pure. So as you're burning it, you're talking about very little arsenic, very little of all the rest of this stuff, and yet we can't use it because coal is supposed to be dirty and awful.
Mm-hmm.
But not in North America. We've got a different kind of coal than the rest of the world. So having these insights, which the ancient people did, because they were looking for fuel, and cutting down trees all the time isn't necessarily a good thing. But you've got to have hotter fires for different types of ore.
Yep.
I'm not exactly sure how they would make bronze, but the process is using tin and copper together in the same melt so that you can get this bronze, which is slightly stronger than the copper and still flexible enough to do what it needs to do on the battlefield. But again, you have to have the right temperature stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I'd like to try to get a forge and just go for all the basics, see if I
Yep.
can do it, because that was so important for survival. I mean, to go from rocks and sticks to metal, I think is one of the biggest achievements that mankind has ever done. And it takes a lot of secret knowledge,
Oh
You
yeah.
get it right the first time. You never do.
Yep. And it's not like they just one day said, "Oh, I'm going to melt these together and make a different alloy." No, someone spent a lot of time and years passing down their knowledge and trying different ways to do things.
How would they even know that, what they're trying to get out of it? Because this is dirt. I mean, I know, to me, if I'm looking at a riverbed and I see a big strain of black in that riverbed, I'm not thinking to myself, very first thing, oh, there's the metal, I can use that for other things. I'm thinking that's disgusting. You know, I mean, what is that big black patch right in the middle of the water there? What is that doing?
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that pops into my mind is, oh, I can use that to make knives. That's crazy.
Right.
You've got to go through a huge line of reasoning before you get from that weird shape and color thing in the water to, hey, I can make a knife out of that. And to think that's spontaneous is really short-sighted.
Mm-hmm.
People have to spread that value.
Oh, absolutely. It's just like any of the megalithic structures across the world, like Peru or Göbekli Tepe and stuff like that. They're like, oh, well, it was built at this time, we figure. Okay, how many years before they built this were they practicing other different monuments and stuff that are gone because of the weathers of time? If it like it wasn't buried, it's going to be gone. So how long did it take them to learn how to do that stuff?
Right. And what if it was passed down from a civilization that had just been destroyed?
Mm-hmm.
Whole Younger Dryas theory again.
Oh yeah.
So I think these values are imparted. I mean, look, all over the world, gold is used as sacrifices for the gods. Who told them that? You know? So the Proto-Indo-European idea is that gold is the flesh of the gods. And this is why they traded it originally. They were the first ones to trade it, and they were trading it back and forth between the chieftains and his warriors, right? So they would give each other gifts as sort of bonding, right? And the idea was that, now that you've bonded, you have to trade, you have to continue giving these gifts so that you have a good, relationship. And they called this tribute. This was before taxes. So you would give the tribute to the chieftain. He would dole it out to his most valued warriors and all the rest of that. But that's how gold got started as a trade. Well, why the hell are they using the same flesh of the gods as sacrifices in places like Mexico?
Mm-hmm.
What is it about this stuff that makes them associate it with the gods? Nobody knows.
And it's
And
probably
they're not
that,
too interested.
right. And it's probably that same reason because they revered it as the flesh of gods. That's probably why it's still just as expensive and valuable today. I mean, we have different uses for it now. But
Right?
before you had those uses, gold was always, even in the early days of America, it was sought after. And
First thing.
Yep.
And so these are questions that I think people should keep in their mind when looking at these things is why would they go from point A to point B? Point A being there's a big old rock that we use as a marker. Point B, here's 3 stones. We're going to use 3 stones every single time to put that massive rock on top of these 3 stones so that people down there can see it. Where's the point A to point B here? I mean, how did they go from there? But, you see the Dolmans over in Europe, and you gotta have to figure that there's got to be cross-contamination going on between cultures here.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, in my personal opinion, I'm open to being proven wrong. If somebody wants to let it out, please. I'm looking for people who want to trash my Canaanite Phoenician hypothesis. If you have somebody who is a major contrarian, I'll take them too. But I think the Canaanite Phoenicians are probably the ones that were in contact with pre-Columbian America in many different forms, including the Knights Templar. But I think it's all Canaanite Phoenician. They just don't disappear after inventing the alphabet. I'm sorry. It just doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah,
So,
it's actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I was gonna wrap it up. Is there anything more you had to say?
No, I was just gonna bring back how we were talking about like going from using rocks to using metals for tools. What's interesting about in the UP here across pre-Columbian America is they were using copper for all their tools, and then they stopped and went back to using sticks and rocks around the same time as the Bronze Age collapsed in Europe. And then they just used copper as for spiritual reasons. Same type of same as what they would have revered for gold. And they didn't have their hands on gold up here; they had copper.
Right. So they didn't have access to tin. Tin is far more rare than copper is. And even if you've got this 100% pure copper, you need the tin as well. And the only place that they were finding a lot of tin is, and how did they think, hey, let's mix this with the copper and get bronze?
Yeah.
There's so much trial and error involved. It's almost hard to believe that it took thousands of years. Like, it would take a lot more if I was the one looking at it, unless I had some sort of divine inspiration or something, which they claim. They claim that they were in contact with other beings, other entities.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give the ancient man a little bit more credit, because God damn it, he fucking deserves it.
Yeah, no kidding. So.
Well, thank you guys for watching. Like and share this. Share this with your friends. Maybe they'll get something out of it. Maybe somebody will come and try to attack me about this Canaanite Phoenician thing. I'm looking for it. I can't wait. But this has been Jeff Up North, and definitely go check out Ricardo Calvario. He's another guy who's published a lot of what Jeff Up North is doing. He's a great follow if you're on Instagram or Twitter or YouTube. Check him out, and definitely check out Jeff Up North. This has been a Headless Giant. Sorry, I get confused with my other show. Anyways, well, thank you guys for joining me, and we'll see you again next time.
We'll see ya.